got interested in psychiatry.
It's sort of AI versus humanity going on right now. What is a sign that you can get into therapy and you can, at least without being it so expensive, you can clear out your matter, you can get out of a situation? In the US and UK, in Europe primarily, there's a waiting list on therapy. Is that
Massive. I've just come back to London. It's massive, right?
We got a research also that says that 48.7% people are using now AI, ChatGPT for mental health issues, like for therapy.
Suddenly, there is a tool which is solving for some of these things. Access, right? Cost, right? Non-judgmental approach, anonymity.
Things in therapy are expensive, but other parts of the world have insurance. Do India also have insurance for therapy?
The short answer is yes, but
People feel AI is judgment free, but I think it's also emotion free. It's not developing a bond between like that real kind of a problem solving situation. It's you might have a delusion that it's judgment free, but it might not be helping your emotions.
I do think that the more disclosure you make with a chatbot, the more lonely you might end up feeling, the more isolated you might end up feeling, essentially, right?
Today's episode of the Gut Feel Show is co-powered by Zoe Wellness, India's most advanced recovery and longevity studio. And honestly, if you're a millennial trying to balance work, parenting, and health, Zoe is that one space that actually feels like a reset button. They've combined cutting-edge science with personalized care. Cryosauna for instant recovery, M-Cella for your pelvic strength, Balancer Pro for lymphatic drainage, IV therapy, functional nutrition, holistic wellness, skin diagnosis. Basically everything your body has been trying to tell you it needs. And because Zoe is co-powering this episode, they are offering 10,000 rupees off on their membership if you use my name, Prranav Vashistha. Link in bio to book your first session. Hello, Dr. Malik. How are you?
Good. Thank you for having me.
Most welcome, and this has been a most awaited, I would say, for this year, the most awaited conversation, because I've been working in this space for a very, very long time. Mental health, and I would like to understand your journey first. Where did you start and how has it been going?
God, how much time do we have? So I'll keep it brief. I went to medical school here in India, then got interested in psychiatry by working in a not-for-profit in Delhi, and then decided to specialize in it. I went off to the UK, trained in psychiatry, worked in psychiatry as a consultant in the National Health Service there, and started managing teams in mental health and services in mental health very early in my career. And that role kept growing. And then I decided to learn business, the business side of health, and went to business school and went to London Business School, did my MBA, came back, joined the board of a large mental health provider organization. But in the UK, and at all this time, there was this thought process of saying all the care we deliver is very service and provider centric. What that means is कि यार डॉक्टर के लिए क्या चल रहा है ठीक and how do you and that's how services have been structured in healthcare, but in large part, right? Think about it, a lot centered on the patient or the client and so I tried to do a bit of that. And secondly, in my roles which was largely in the public sector at that time, one of the big challenges was how do you manage increasing demand with reducing resources, basically, right? Because it was the government sector, but it was shrinking, demand was going up, prevalence was going up. So how do you manage that with shrinking resources? And one of the things that became more obvious, that's how the question started. But then you looked at the client journey and realized that families and clients come to services very late in the mental health space, right? And it's like you're sitting with a knee fracture, a leg fracture for 3 years and then going to see somebody. That's what happened in mental health. And that realization was linked to the business of health, but also the care of health, because what that meant was that people came to you very late. What that meant was the treatment was harder, took longer, more intensive resources. And you had to step back as somebody running a system saying, actually, if these people came earlier, then the whole cost of the system would come down, basically. Yeah, that was the starting point of the thing. And then you said, actually, that's a good starting point, but actually it's also better for them because the cost to them, the family, careers, relationships, all that comes down, right? So that was what, and I was trying to solve that in that UK system, struggled with it. I said, India आते हैं वापस, वहाँ पे करेंगे. So I moved back in 2014. I've been building Amaha since 2016, and yeah, that's been the journey. Last 10 years have been about building a mental health organization in India, essentially.
Superb. I think that's much, much needed. I want to start the discussion with the involvement of AI post COVID. AI, it's sort of AI versus humanity going on right now. What's your take on AI?
I think it's fantastic what's happening with AI generally, right? So take on AI generally is that as I was saying to you before we started, I have a young child, and so there are often thoughts about what does it mean for his future, his job, his job prospects, careers, what should he be focusing on. So there are some anxieties around it, but I think on the whole, anything that helps us take better, faster decisions, smooths the operating challenges in multiple areas, increases productivity overall. I'm all for it. So I think on the whole, I'm very optimistic about AI. I'm a big early user of AI myself, and within Amaha. But I think there's some challenges with it as well, right? So I think it's not. I think somebody said this to me the other day, and I read it somewhere that we are on the first session of a test match, and especially when it comes to mental health and AI, and sometimes behave like we are on the final day and the final session. So it's just still the start of the journey, and so much has to be figured out. I think if we approach it that way, that there is actually just the starting point, tip of the iceberg, the potential is huge, risks are massive, there are lots of unknowns, there are lots of unknown unknowns, then I think it's fantastic. Using it with that awareness is fantastic.
But we got a research also that says that 48.7% people are using now AI ChatGPT for mental health issues, like for therapy. What is that?
Yeah, if you think about what's happening, right? I've been now working in this space for 2.5 decades, and I've worked at a system level for a long time now. I didn't beyond my individual practice is what I mean. And when you go and talk about mental health, you always talk about two or three common themes. One is stigma, other is access. The third big one has always been a lack of professionals. Not enough therapists, not enough psychiatrists, not enough counselors available. And so that leads to something called the treatment gap.
Yeah.
Right? Which is very real. So all these barriers to access, the stigma, access, cost, quality, availability of professionals, they have been real sort of progenitors of treatment gap for the last 30, 40, 50 years since we've been talking about it, till as recently as 5, 7 years ago, we were still saying the same thing. Now, suddenly, there is a tool which is solving for some of these things. Access, right? Cost, right? Non-judgmental approach, anonymity, right? And all the things, so stigma gets taken care of. So all these things are, so I'm not surprised that this tool is available and people have sort of jumped at it because people have been studying for a while. I mean, with the prevalence of problems, people have been studying for a while. So I understand why people are using it. Actually, I think it's a great sign if it's starting to help people think about getting support. I think
Inhibition is going away.
Inhibition is going away in a way that can be most frictionless in some ways, right? Because रात को 2 बजे available है, and it's confidential apparently, which is not. We'll talk about that. It feels confidential. It feels anonymous. This is anonymous, it's not confidential, right? It's empathetic, which is also something that is more complex than it seems, and so people are using it.
They have their safe zone in their hostel room, just talking to a therapist talking to a bot or an AI at night. So I think that's the comfort zone also.
It is, and when we talk to clients, I mean, we see a lot of clients in obviously live with humans, and when you talk to clients, it's very clear that one of the things that they worry about is being judged, right? कि यार ये मेरी बात समझेगा कि नहीं समझेगा? How will that reaction be? And it takes a while before you can actually get comfortable. I've been in therapy. It takes a while. Before you get comfortable with the therapist. Even with my level of experience in the space, we say I can open up more to them, right? So it's not easy. It's not. On the other side of the table, you can sit and say, बात कर लो, but actually it's not
Something you
easy.
knew, it's easier said than done.
Yeah, absolutely right. So you can understand why, where it feels like this person will not be judgmental, is in easy access. So I mean, I'm the last person who will sit down and blame or find fault with people who are trying to use this as a support tool. And it's not their fault. They are struggling.
It's, I think, a system
They are
failure.
finding something that will help in a way that they are comfortable with getting help, and it's meeting them where they are. So that's the
Isn't it also a sign of a systematic failure? Like this thing always existed, but now people are okay to use it. Like how to approach therapy has AI made that more approachable?
I'm thinking that's a good question. I don't know if it's made it more approachable. I think, and I also don't know if a lot of people are using it are thinking of it as therapy.
Yeah.
So I think I think it's just some degree of help. So I still don't know if it translates in everybody's mind as a therapy substitute.
It's, I think, absolutely nowhere close to therapy. It's just that listening here which
Yeah.
makes you feel comfortable.
Yeah. So I still don't know whether the stigma to go to a professional has fully gone away because of AI. I don't think it has, but I think I do think that it's at least helping with the initial first step. Absolutely right.
But a lot of people, like over 1 million people, have spoken to ChatGPT about suicidal cases. That's horrible. Like that's too big a number. It's overwhelming.
It depends on how you look at it. I think it's too small a number. I think there's probably more. In terms of actual prevalence of the problem, the actual incidence of people thinking about self-harm and suicide. And I must say at this point, anybody who gets triggered by this is we're going to talk a bit more about this. So please be mindful of whether this is safe for you to hear or not. But it's not. I mean, they've come out and Sam Altman's come and openly talked about what 0.15% of their users are talking about self-harm and suicide, and that is where I think the risk starts.
Yeah.
I think that's the tip of the risk, and then we can talk about the other risk. But I think if you think about, I mean, just take a step back and think of what happens in a therapeutic session, right? First is you have to build an alliance. You have to build an alliance with the right boundaries with the professional, right? Then they have to understand your context, right? There's the context, and then they have to apply some evidence-based science using the alliance for your context to help you through your journey, right? Then they have to be accountable. Then they have to manage your privacy, and they have to manage your and confidentiality, and they have to manage risk. This is what should happen. These are like non-negotiables in a therapeutic setting, right? So if you come to Amaha, this is the minimum you can expect from anybody who works with us, right? As an example.
That's a framework that you follow.
And it's not even mine. It's not something we've developed. It's a very universally accepted baseline standard of good therapeutic practice. And the framework we follow is hopefully not just the baseline, but more about client sensitivity and keeping them first and trying to figure out their problems. But as a minimum, you should expect this much, right? Okay, alliance बनाएंगे. They will form a relationship with you, or try to at least. They will understand कि आप कहाँ से आ रहे हो, right? They will then apply their learning and science and experience to that context. They will then respect your privacy and confidentiality. They will manage your risk and keep you safe, or try to keep you safe, actually, right? Or support you, or actually the right way of saying it is support you in keeping yourself safe, right? So now ये सब करना है. I don't think that's where chatbots today are. I mean, if you look at the study that's come out of Brown recently, and all this US studies is really showing how many things in this group of parameters are deviated from when it comes to chatbot, right? Because the reality is they're not designed for this purpose, right? We are using them for something that's not been designed for, and I think that's where the gap is. I really think that the accountability of being explicit about what can be and cannot be achieved with the conversation like that, especially for young people, right? I mean, that prevalence goes up from 18% to 22% as you get into from your teens to your early 20s, and especially for that age group, using AI tools for support. I not just don't single out ChatGPT, it's the largest but not the only one, right? And that कि हम ये tools क्या कर सकते हैं और क्या नहीं कर सकते, वो clarity, I think the onus of the clarity rests on everybody, right? There's some people like me in the profession and people like you who are supporting these conversations, and the tech companies themselves being explicit about and those guardrails, right, have to build the system, but also have to start that conversation and disseminate it much more widely about what is possible.
That boundary has to be created.
At least कि आपको पता होना चाहिए कि ये क्या हो सकता है, नहीं हो सकता, right? If think about the challenges, right? One of the things that a chatbot does very well in the LLM world is that it mirrors your how you're feeling. It creates an empathy situation. Right? This deceptive empathy, as we've started to call it sometimes, is quite dangerous because it can do two things, right? If let's say in my world, if you are suffering from a psychotic illness like schizophrenia or schizoaffective disorder or bipolar disorder with psychosis, which means you have had some break from reality, what you might be experiencing might not be the reality, and actually might be putting you in an unsafe situation. Delusions, hallucinations, and paranoia that and the chatbot might not recognize.
And this might make you even hate humans further
It might actually increase the risk
of
of
not
harm.
talking to a real human.
Yeah,
Because now
Yeah,
you will feel
yeah,
comfort zone
yeah.
in that space.
Absolutely right. Because you're
Like it's
the
all
rest of the world, I'm right. The rest of the world doesn't understand me. So that scenario, and also if it validates some of your delusions, then it can increase the risk also.
And I think Black Mirror has shown this very, very. I don't know if people have seen that, but Black Mirror showed the dark side of AI using as therapy.
I've not seen the show, but I think the other bit is on the self-harm side, that the suicide side, and that's been the case now. That's they're talking about it in the US, is really around saying there are two extreme scenarios, right? Either I'm showing empathy and I'll play along, or I've now built in guardrails which just completely shut down. Either, I mean, definitely the latter is better than the former because it's at least safe, slightly safer, but it's still very disconcerting for especially if a young person is in that very terrible, overwhelming position. It's disconcerting for them essentially, right? So I think that idea around that is very, 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 very problematic. Third is the alliance building and the context understanding is very difficult unless you spend that kind of energy, right? So on those areas, it's really about an equal investment almost, where you have to invest a lot to build the context, to build the alliance, because that part could potentially work. I think that part, but I don't think most people are doing that. I don't think most people even understand they have to do that. Exactly.
I think that is where, when you say alliance, is where I was also wanted to bring that point. Was people feel AI is judgment free, but I think it's also emotion free. It's not developing a bond between like that real kind of a problem solving situation. It's you might have a delusion that it's judgment free, but it might not be helping your emotions.
I don't know the answer to that question because, but I do think that there are times when the empathy feels like it's developing an emotional connect, right? So it does something. It can feel like that, and that sometimes very helpful. But I think we've seen the data, right? That the more disclosure you make with a chatbot, the more lonely you might end up feeling, the more isolated you might end up feeling, essentially, right? So because you're isolating yourself and using that as a sole companion tool. So again, how good is it at the emotional aspects of it? I think it's mixed. I think in some aspects could be very good actually. But again, is it good
But it's not following a framework like you mentioned. It's trying to please you because it wants to feel it wants you to feel that this is the best thing. It's sort of pleasing you with everything that you sort of want in that situation.
I'm not a technician on the LLM side, but my experience is that is designed to drive engagement.
Yeah. It's they want you to be spending time there. And also tell me more about privacy, because a lot of people think that it's confidential.
Yeah, I mean, privacy is very straightforward. I mean, the chatbots themselves said they're not private. Right? Sam Altman's come out and said, please don't use this for therapy.
Most people don't know that. So they listen to the other side.
So he's come out and said that don't use this is not private. Don't so using identifying data on chatbots, not really understanding whether data is being stored. There are now legal obligations on chatbots not to delete their data. So I think one thing people have to understand is that this is not confidential information. There is no obligation of privacy, that confidentiality that would exist in a clinician therapeutic relationship with a therapist or a psychiatrist that exists with a chatbot. And this is not even anybody's fault. The chatbots are themselves saying that. Right? ChatGPT said that it's not going to be not common. Yeah. So that's one part, and that can have number of implications. Right? That can have implications on your data being used elsewhere. That can have implications on your data being used tomorrow in a legal context. In any scenario, your data being used in a relationship context. So I really have to think about where am I sharing this information essentially.
Tell me more about how a therapist, a real therapist, can help you heal, because people need to understand beyond like the framework that you mentioned.
Yeah.
What in the real scenario, take an example and help us understand what can be the steps in healing that that you get from a therapist.
So first disclaimer, I'm not a therapist, I'm a psychiatrist, and my therapy colleagues, more than 200 of them in the organization, will hate me for taking an expert position on this, but I'll tell you my understanding of it, right? And really, and it's really about saying the first step is build the matching, right? And this is what AI can actually be very helpful. Actually, how do you connect with the right person? So there, and we're building tools for that. Right? We're building AI.
That's a good use of AI.
Yeah, very good use of AI. So actually saying, actually, how do I'm looking for a therapist. How do I find the right therapist? Is there a tool that can help me find the right therapist? And is there enough data on both sides? I'm putting enough context. There's enough information available about this person. Can the matching happen through AI? Used to happen through forms and interviews. I think that bit can be automated now. I think that's the first step. Yeah, get absolutely right. That's the first bit. The second bit then is saying you build the therapeutic alliance and the therapeutic contract. What that means is that we both through small micro behaviors going to build a connect, right? And there's science behind this. And
a lot of interesting thing that you mentioned, micro behavior, which gets ignored on AI.
And yeah, absolutely.
There's no micro behavior.
Yeah, there's lot, and you know, and there's lots of non-verbal cues lost. There's lots,
Body language.
Yeah, but and you know, and we saw that initially with teleconsultation also. When we moved from in-person to tele, we saw a bit of that. But then when data started coming out that actually that was compensated for by more disclosure. So actually, you say because you're sitting in your own home environment, you were sharing more, but some non-verbal cues were missed. So there was a balancing out, and actually the outcomes on tele and actual in-person consultation and therapy for a lot of conditions generally quite comparable. Right? So that's but here that's not happening, right? So that's the second bit is saying build the alliance, understand the context, set goals. Right? Okay, this is what we're trying to achieve. Set some sense of what good would look like. Right? Give some activities that would reduce immediate distress, because most people actually come in distress.
Immediate distress.
Yeah, so reduce some, give some sort of tools around that, and then set a frequency in a contract in which you will meet regularly. What work will the individual do in between sessions, typically called homework by therapists. So what homework will somebody do between sessions, and then how do we say we have got reached some goals and make the decision of continuing the work, right? Doing all this while maintaining confidentiality, right? Doing all this while maintaining safety, right? Because you could at any point be, because of the psychological state, in an unsafe situation, right? Or could be putting other people in unsafe situations. So that's where the therapeutic obligation comes in, and where people have to meet their own ethical practice guidelines to make sure that the client is safe, and those and doing it ethically, right? Where you don't breach boundaries. So all those things underpin the practice, but starts with an alliance and goes to recovery through some pre-agreed goals. Basically, that's how the help works.
So it's very structured.
Yeah. I mean, good therapy can be eclectic, which means it can draw from multiple modalities, but at the same time, it should be something that is a shared goal-driven journey where I am trying to work with somebody and supporting them in the journey. I'm not trying, and you know, unlike traditional medicine, therapy doesn't work in a way that I'm going to treat you. It's a more collaborative journey, right? And actually, what we're learning in all of healthcare right now is that, and this is a bit of digression, that all healthcare has to become more collaborative. This idea of I'm the doctor and I'm going to treat you and you sit there and I sit here is not worked out in most long-term chronic illnesses. It works really well in an acute situation. You've had an accident, you need to be operated on, you need somebody who will take control of the situation. Absolutely, right? That time, that's not a time to do collaborative care in my view. But people with long-term chronic conditions, that care has to be collaborative, because it's about that whole person. It's about meeting them where they are, and that is something a good therapist should do. Do collaborative, and psychiatrists as well. That's something a good therapist, psychiatrist should do, is do good collaborative care, which is continuous, which is based on agreed outcomes. What does good look like, right? And which tries to meet the person where they are. And all these things are difficult with AI today, at least.
Yeah, absolutely. Let's get to some fundamental things. Like, I want to understand like why a lot of people are not reaching to therapy. Like you also mentioned, the later they get into therapy, the expensive it is. So what is a sign that you can get into therapy and you can, at least without being it so expensive, you can clear out your matter, you can get out of a situation easier? Like, is there a sign signaling that people can today address, understand? Because there's a big stigma, taboo, sabko pata hai. There's a fundamental problem that people just avoid therapy. Why is that so? Why do people feel unsafe?
I'm probably getting older, but also we work with too many people. I think I've also, I mean, we work with Amaha now and Children First. We work with at least 30,000 plus families every year, right? That's the number we work with. And the more you work with people rather than for people, which means you work in collaboration, the more you learn and go away from this blame of पहले क्यों नहीं आए, जल्दी आए थे, to understanding how hard it is, right? So at least I think the first thing I'm just going to change the premise of the question a bit and say that I completely understand why people struggle to access support, right? And all those things, reasons we talked about before, there's stigma. There's stigma at two levels, right? There's stigma at the level of the ecosystem, society, family, workplace, school, college, whatever it is. And then there's stigma that you impose on yourself, which is कि यार मैं पागल थोड़ा ना हूँ, right? So नहीं मैं क्यों जाऊँगा थेरेपिस्ट के पास? हाँ, वो यार मैं थेरेपिस्ट के पास क्यों जाऊँगा? मैं साइकियाट्रिस्ट के पास क्यों जाऊँगा? मैं थोड़ा ना पागल हूँ. So that stigma is very, very valid. And I don't think it's an individual responsibility on their own to solve for that stigma. I think all of us have to work to bring conversations like this, other conversations have to happen to help people see through stigma. And I really think, at least in metro and tier 1 cities in India, that is falling apart now, especially with the younger people, that is falling apart. So more and more younger people are now accessing support than they ever have, basically, in this country, talking India, right? So that's first.
Why is it falling apart? Because they're into more nuclear setups or lonely setups?
No. What I mean is stigma is falling apart.
Stigma is falling.
Stigma is falling. So stigma is falling.
With the Gen Z is somewhere I see they're more excessive.
More excessive, more support. The stigma is falling.
Yeah.
Largely because there are more open conversations in their ecosystem.
And they've had more exposure than millennials and boomers.
And I think if there was ever a silver lining of COVID, which no others,
yeah,
I think it's really brought that conversation out, whether it's in schools, whether it's in colleges, whether it's in workplaces. It's really given people at least validation to have the conversation.
Yeah, that first step is now open.
Everybody from the prime minister to your school teachers talking about it. Then you're like, okay,
normal हो गया.
Normalize कर दिया, right?
Problem ये थी कि कोई बात ही नहीं कर रहा है.
Right. That and to the extent that because of the work I do, there's so many people you meet in your social circle who will say, "Can I call you tomorrow and have a conversation?" And now it's become more and more like they just mention one of 5 other people. अच्छा ये problem है, इसका कल बात कर सकते हैं क्या? So like there's definitely a shift in having a conversation about it. Right? That's one thing. I think the other thing is access is hard here. There are, and if you move out of, I mean, we now have clients from 600 plus cities in India.
Wow.
Right? And there are towns I've never heard of. And that's not my ignorance. I'm fairly well traveled within India. But there are small towns I've never heard of. And there are pockets in India, if you look at the map of India, that there is very little available. If you go to the Northeast, for example, there's very little resources available for mental health support, right? So from that perspective, access is just hard. It is expensive, right? I'm going to address the cost issue because it comes up a lot, right? I think cost for me is a function of need for a lot of people. And what I mean by that is that we often see in practice the same person who will spend 2,000 on a weekend going to a movie or going to a show and then going out to dinner will not spend the 1,500 on therapy, right? That happens. So there I have little less sympathy and that also became a case of I have not felt the need that acutely. So that changes as people feel the need is more acute and more severe, which then leads to a situation where people are coming late, right? So I'll avoid it. But it's also a genuine issue of cost for a lot of people that is just simply not affordable, right? So I recognize the position of privilege I am in, where I can talk like this, but for a lot of people, access to therapy, access to mental health support is not affordable. There's lots of government stuff happening. There's lots of stuff happening in events to make it more accessible, more affordable, but it's still a long way to go on that, right? So actually, we've set up this not-for-profit called the India Mental Health Alliance, right? And so it's working, now it's an alliance of more than 230 plus not-for-profits across India. And it's really about saying how can we enable people who are doing really good work at the grassroots to drive their access, whereas the conventional type of support is not affordable people. Right? So because I'm saying you have to address the problem from both ends. Yes. You make this better, you make it accessible, At the other end, you say, how do we, and there are lots of people, small organizations, small not-for-profits doing amazing work at the grassroots with specific groups, whether it's like juvenile delinquents, whether it's women who suffer trauma and abuse. Lots of people in the Northeast itself, lots of people doing specific work. How can we enable them more? So that's work happening at the Alliance, right? And this side you say, okay, at the Amaha side you say, how do I build an ecosystem that can provide access in different ways? Language, timing, online, offline, multi-city presence, multi-professionals working together, psychiatrists, therapists working together, so you're not going pillar to post. So you can, so those access pieces we are solving for, bringing supply, so delivering therapy at a huge price range, so that's really accessible to more people, and recognizing that it's still not accessible to everybody. Doing the work at the not-for-profit side to then make it more accessible, essentially.
So, Amit, tell me also one thing about insurance, because we know that it is expensive. Things in therapy are expensive, but other parts of the world have insurance. Do India also have insurance for therapy?
Yes. So the short answer is yes, but very limited. Let me just qualify that a bit more and give you the full spectrum of what we're talking about, right?
Is it? Because most people, I think, don't know about that.
So India has insurance for mental illness, not necessarily therapy. So I'll qualify that. That's why I'll qualify it. So, and that's some amazing work that's happened by the government in the last few years. So want to highlight that. So I think if you just break down the spectrum of care, right? And I'm going to shamelessly use Amaha for a second. To break down the spectrum of care, right? It starts at self-care and well-being, which is saying using self-care tools around mindfulness, around cognitive behavioral therapy, around positive psychology, and using those to stay mentally healthy, right? A lot of these tools can also help you at the early stages of a mild episode of anxiety or depression as well, right? So that's the first part. That's tools available freely. We have our own self-care app. We have millions of users on it. So that's available freely. That costs very little to anybody. So that's the first thing on the cost side, right? The second is around consultation work, working with an individual practitioner. Today in India, the two biggest segments of practitioners you work with are clinical psychologists or counselors, and the second is psychiatrists or medical doctors, right? They typically see you either in a clinic or a hospital, an outpatient department, or they'll see you online, right? And the third bit is actually for somebody who is severely unwell, sometimes issues around risk or very intensive treatment requirement, they go into a mental health hospital, right? Now, this is a spectrum of what is provided today, right? Then there is obviously layers of other things like peer-to-peer support and community support and listening services that I'm not addressing right now, but all those things. And so Amaha has this holistic ecosystem of all these things, right? Today, where this part obviously is low price, the self-care part is low price, so most people can access that either for free or very cheaply. And this mental health hospital part today, with legislation from the new Mental Health Act, insurance companies are legally obligated to cover mental illness at par with physical illness. So actually, what that means is that if you have an insurance policy, and I'm not a legal expert, but this is my understanding of it, if you have an insurance policy that covers your hospital stay for, I don't know, a cardiac bypass or a gastric banding surgery or anything, any medical procedure, then you should also get covered for a mental health inpatient stay. It's mandated by law. There have been test cases. Some of them have gone right up to Supreme Court, and
so it's primarily for inpatient.
Inpatient. So that is undisputable. Obviously, there are issues around, and I've spoken to the IRD as well as about it. They're all fully supportive about it. There are issues around how the language is sometimes worded, and that's what the insurance company will sometimes use. But the principle is that you should get the same cover for your mental illness inpatient stay as your physical inpatient. Now, that same principle applies to outpatient treatment as well. But what happens in India is most insurance policies don't cover outpatient treatment, which is why. So the problem with the psychiatry visits, for example, is not a problem of mental health. It's a problem generally of outpatient coverage in general, basically, right? Because most outpatient cover care in India is not covered, right? And even fewer will cover therapy even as an outpatient service. So even if you have a policy that covers outpatient medical care, so psychiatry might get covered in that, getting therapy covered is even rarer right now, right? So that's the range of coverage. So on this end of the spectrum where we're talking about therapy and outpatient psychiatry, the cover is barely there, or a very, very poor penetration of it. This place, the cover is legally obligated. Some people don't know it. And in other cases, insurance companies make it very hard sometimes for people to be able to access that cover, essentially.
But is it across the world in the US? Is there therapy insurance?
Yes. There's a lot of
Therapy costs are covered?
yeah, a lot of places will have insurance covered by therapy.
So is it coming to India, or is there any, do you see any possibility? Because there's a huge, that can solve a huge problem.
Yeah, the possibility, yes, but if you look at the regulator today, who's doing phenomenal work, I think there are so many other things that are solved for. I don't know when this will become a priority. I think we talked to them in principle. They're like, yeah, please, absolutely, we should do this.
Because this can break that barrier of
You say that, but also the other problem is that the insurance penetration in India is very low. Health insurance penetration in India is so low that I don't know how much it's going to change things.
yeah, half of the people don't have that.
But then other avenues are opening up, right? So we at Amaha now work with more than 140 plus organizations, right? Everybody from American Express to a National Law School to IIM Bangalore
the organizations
to
are covering
Godrej.
it up.
So they cover it for their employees or their students. Or
That's a very
faculty.
good move, because
Yeah.
at a corporate level it's being covered.
It's covered. We covered by lots of organizations. We covered for our employees with external, because of confidentiality. We use external providers to cover for our employees basically, and our therapists and our other non-clinical employees. But we work with a lot of organizations that provide that coverage. So other avenues are opening up. They are making it more accessible. There's also now gradually not-for-profit money coming in. So what that means is lots of very wealthy families who they have their own lived experience of mental illness, wanting to support the space.
I know one this Harsh Mariwala,
Raj
Rajvi Mariwala. I know she's a very good friend of mine.
Raj does a lot of phenomenal work. They do a lot of phenomenal work in this space. The Bharat Rams in Delhi, who are
That's the CSR money getting into this.
that's at least private money, private wealth getting into it. So
Family offices.
Dhoni Lenikani has put a lot of money into mental health through NIMHANS. The Bharat Rams in Delhi, we're studying in Delhi, Gurgaon right now, not far from here, are the ones who supported the India Mental Health Alliance, the one probably talked about, and they're putting a lot of money into it. So that money again is about making this affordable in one way or the other, either through policy or through provision. So there's lots of stuff. There's lots of stuff happening, which gives me hope that beyond insurance, employers, benefactors will hopefully create the ecosystem. And with all health, what happens in my view, at least, you look at the history of health, the private health in India, as things become more acceptable as a norm, then the cost comes down and also trickles down to the wider population. I mean, if we take sort of angioplasty as an example, right? Now it can happen in a tier 4 town. But 30 years ago, that was impossible. And it happens at a much lower cost as well. So my hope is that if you make it a good mental health aspirational for everybody, it will then spur the ecosystem so that cost can eventually come down for everybody.
Tell me one more thing. Like there are these avenues that you mentioned, but a lot of people don't know about it. There's lack of awareness. People randomly hit places, or someone is helping someone reach something. Like there will be calls. There are calling services also, 24/7 calling services for mental health. And there are a lot of avenues. But people who either the bubble is bursted, that they're not capable enough to right now consciously find something well enough. So they are being provided by someone in their vicinity, friend or a family. So how to find, because a plethora of information is there out there.
I agree. So I think let me just break it down and make it simpler, right? There is right now government institutions, places like NIMHANS, the Central Institute in Ranchi or PDI in Chandigarh, and who do amazing work in mental health, right? Amazing. But again, they can only do so much because they're certain institutions. But there's also good work coming out of them. So the Telemanus helpline comes out of NIMHANS and does fantastic work in driving access, basically, for example, right? Then there are private organizations like ours who do end-to-end work. So you can log on to the Amaha website today and find a therapist or a psychiatrist and see them, basically, right? So
Just get started.
You can get started. You can do it online. We have clinics we have I think 6 centers now in Bangalore. We have three locations in Delhi now, and then one in Bombay. So plus it's as I said, we have people coming from 600 cities, 15 different languages, who are seeking therapy and psychiatry support, right? And we have a system where the teams work together. So our therapists and psychiatrists will talk to each other on the same platform. Data is confidential because we don't share data with third parties. We keep it within the organization. We built our own technology so that we don't have to share data externally. So that's we spent like 10 years building technology so that we can keep it on our servers and keep it internally, basically, right? So the organizations like ours. And the not-for-profit, the CSR money I talked about is typically getting routed to organizations. So for example, the Nilkani money is coming into Nimans, right? Or the Bharatrams have funded the alliance, but they're also funding Children First for supporting families who can't afford the treatment. In here in Gurgaon and Delhi, Children First is a child mental health organization that is part of Amaha, and they've been supporting it for a long time in this work in saying, okay, we will support this for children families who can't afford it, we will subsidize the treatment. So that's typically happening through organizations and rather on its own. And there's lots of fantastic work happening with the Sleepwell Foundation, Salam Balak Trust, but that's more happening at the grassroots. So I'm telling you, there are hundreds of not-for-profits that are doing this work at the community grassroots level with specific groups of people.
With clear intent.
With clear intent. So there's somebody, so that work is happening. Your quickest and easiest bet is like a private organization today, but you have to figure out, I don't want to keep hopping on about Amaha, but you have to figure out what is ethical, safe, secure, right? And then there is the government institutes, especially the central government one, that do phenomenal work in providing support.
Tell me one more thing. I've heard this for a very long while I was working in the mental health space, that in the US and UK, in Europe primarily, there's a waiting list on therapy. Is that
massive? I've just come back to London. It's massive, right? So I think.
I can't believe that. Like, I know it's. Tell me more about it. Yeah.
So, I mean, for specific conditions, I was talking to an ADHD specific ADHD provider in the UK, and like a 9-month wait list that the government is trying to now get through by giving contracts to private providers. So the government's paying for assessments and treatment so that they can bring down the wait time, basically. So, and it is in the UK I'm talking about. So for specific conditions, if you're a child in a young family, it sometimes takes a long time to see a specialist. Even if you're an adult with a serious mental illness, it can take a long time to see. So there are huge wait times, and the systems are quite overwhelmed in some of these countries.
More demand than supply.
More demand than supply. Supply sometimes, I'm be careful what I say here, but supply, and I've worked in the system there. Supply is sometimes not the most efficient because of breakdown. People are working very hard, but the breakdown the system basically, and system not working very efficiently. So I try to take all those learnings and said, okay, how can we build a sort of more streamlined system so that it brings down costs as well for people.
And I've heard a lot of Indian people who have left, are in the US, Canada, or UK. A lot of foreigners also are seeking therapy in India because they can find, plus first of all, it's cheaper for them. And compared to the pricing, I believe is what I've heard. Is that kind of a thing happening?
Yeah, so that's happening. A bunch of providers are now opening up. You have to be careful what the key here is transparency, what you provide and what you can't provide, follow the legal and ethical frameworks. But there's issue of cost, there's issue of availability, there's issue of cultural context. So all those things, right? So for that reason, the diaspora prefer to talk to people who are at least trained in the cultural context, are more easily accessible, costs are lower. So all those things play into it essentially. But I do think that's going to happen more and more.
So that's a hybrid kind of model that is happening.
And again, you have to the way to do it is to be very clear about what the ethical and legal boundaries are, and then and you have to communicate that clearly to the client, that they know that this is what they're getting, and the rest of it they have to get legal. Because and we're going back to AI conversation. The other thing the AI doesn't do very well is a response to crisis.
Yeah.
So if you're a client, if you're a user, if you're an end user, you have to be careful about two things when you use AI, right? One is, where is my information going, which we talked about. And second is, in a crisis, what should I do? You need to know that. You need to know the answer. And you need to, for whatever tool, service, professional you are working with, those two things you should be absolutely asking upfront. Where is my information going? Who are you sharing it with? And in a crisis, what is my plan? And that is, so even with international work, that has to be spelled out up front and explicitly with people so that they're not left in a lurch because they use a therapist in India and they're sitting in somewhere in UK basically.
One more thing, I'm trying to understand there are some confusions as what I faced. I wanted to understand from you because you've worked in this space for 10 years.
25 now.
25, sorry. Yeah. So in the therapy space, there's a licensed therapist, there is a master's degree, there's a PhD degree. Is there a restriction on work?
Yeah, so I'm really not right. I mean, you should talk to our director of psychology services for this answer. There is right now there's a lot of change happening in the space, which is why I'm staying away from the answer. But typically, what has happened is, if you have an MPhil in clinical psychology, you can call yourself the clinical psychologist, right? And that means you can do clinical work, right? And the other people are end up calling themselves counselors or therapists, which are more unregulated words in some ways. But clinical psychology is a defined phrase in the Indian ecosystem today, right? So, and those experts have done an MPhil typically in clinical psychology today. So that much I know. I think beyond that, there's lots of changes coming in regulation. There's a lot of churn happening.
Because that will help increase in supply as well, like because that supply in the sense of the more support we have, the more people we have or more trained. Because I think you, an organization like you will also train people to be.
Yeah, so we're doing that. So we're working with the India Mental Health Alliance closely to build the supply on the capacity building side. So that's where the work is happening. We're already training. I think last year we did training with 1,000+ professionals there in the not for profit. But let me take a step back on the supply side. The number of people is not the problem, right? Today, in my view, from where we are today to what we're trying to get to, I think there is the problem is the dropouts that are happening. And what I mean by that is people entering psychology as an undergraduate, people coming out the other end, trained and ready to practice with individual clients. That is a huge drop off. Some people drop out during the course, some people drop off after. You'll know a bunch of people who've done a psychology degree as an undergraduate who've gone to do something else, MBA or going to HR or going to org development or something, right? They're not doing clinical work. Yeah. And so there's huge drop off there. Secondly, then there is a finite number of high quality MPhil programs that will produce clinical psychologists. And then even there, at both the end, whether after an MA or an MPhil, so we don't get anybody in without an MA, and most of our psychologists have an MPhil or a PhD, right? So that's like that's the predominant qualification. We have some really good masters, but that's a smaller number for us, right? But at any of these places, one of the big things that ends up happening is that a lot of people who get these degrees and come out are not practice ready. And it's same as engineering or anywhere, right? So my issue is that I think that's a low-hanging fruit. We have to fix, and I think that dropout is also happening because the market opportunity has never been there. But I do think today is in the history of India at least, today is the best time to be a clinical psychologist because there is so much demand, right? We can't recruit fast enough.
We can't agree more. 10 years ago, I know it was super drained space, like a deserted space. And right now is the best time.
It is really, it's because if you enjoy that work, and I always keep saying,
there are structures like yours. Your company has a very good structure to things. People can now find organizations where they can work. Initially, they were struggling paying for internships at a hospital, struggling to get work. None of that was happening.
No, I'll just again pipe about our structure a bit, right? So we basically, with the IMHA, we're working in capacity building. So doing some practice readiness work for trained professionals. That's one thing we do. But when you come to Amaha, if you get through this 3-step recruitment process that we have, we do like a month of onboarding and training before you even see a professional, before you see a client. And after that, we have regular weekly supervisions with individual supervisions. We do trainings, we do caseload management training, or we do mocks. There's a lot of the work that we do that will help upskill you and accelerate the journey to becoming better and better at your job. So there's a lot of that avenue happening, and a lot of the stuff people used to pay for. And people in private practice, the rest still pay for supervision. The good ones at least do. And that's so, but we structure that pretty much within the organization.
That's super, because that kind of a pipeline is needed for this ecosystem to thrive.
I think more and more of that will happen.
Super. Amazing talking to you, Dr. Amit, and I am very hopeful that things are changing. Things are changing for the good. There's a good runway ahead of you, and I am hopeful that Amaha will be doing super work.
And we hope so. Thank you so much for having me, and thank you for having this very important conversation. I think that
most welcome, most welcome. This topic is very close to my heart. I really wish we change this kind of paradigm of thinking about mental health and thinking about well-being going forward within the next generation coming up.
Absolutely.
Thank you so much.
Thank you for having me.